From ContainerDays Hamburg, this video is proudly presented by DuxIT.
To start things off, I would like to ask you, how many of you here have at any part of your application an attribute or variable or something called user.id? Awesome, I see some hands, great. What about user_ID? Okay, I see some same folks raising their hands. Or even user ID camel case. Maybe USR ID? Okay, now I want to ask, how many of you have seen things that are exactly the same but named differently? Okay, yeah, this is gonna be fun. Cool, welcome to the It Smells Like Clean Telemetry. By the end of this talk, we're gonna all hopefully walk home with some best practices on managing span creation and your traces. My name is Juliano Costa. I'm a developer advocate at Datadog, and here are a couple of my greatest hits. So I'm a CNCF ambassador. I run a meetup in Linz, where I live in Austria. I'm an OpenTelemetry maintainer, and I contributed to the OpenTelemetry certification. So don't know how many of you have taken this exam. Cool, enough about me. And to start things out, let's get a bit of context to everyone. So let's start with the basics, like what is a span? Or actually, what is a log? So imagine you are seated at home and listening to music, and you have a piece of paper, and you are taking notes of the things that you are listening to. So at 1:06, you listen to It Smells Like Teen Spirit. At 1:11, you listen to Come As You Are. And at 1:15, you listen to Something in the Way. I think we all got the point here, and I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with logs already. But basically, we have a message, or the thing that happened, and we have a timestamp when that happened. And in IT, it's basically the same. We have, again, the content there, the message. We have the service that is emitting that message. We have when that message was emitted. And cool, okay, but Juliano, aren't we talking about spans? Yes, okay, so what is a span? And back again to the piece of paper. With logs, we can know what happened and when it happened, but we don't know how long each step took or what happened before each of them or even after. And we don't know that if log 1 is related to the second log. So we could take each one of those logs and expand into what we call a trace. So a trace is basically composed by spans. Each row here is a different span, and each span is a unit of work within this transaction. So we have the transaction of playing the song. So then within this transaction, we have the buffer audio, we have the stream audio, and we have the update stats. And all of them are connected because there are some connections between them. Great, so let's take a closer look into what each span actually has. If we take the play song span, we have a couple of things that we are already expecting, such as the span name, when it started, when it ended. And then we can calculate the duration. So the size of the bar is also the duration of the span. This is great, but we also get a couple of extra metadata that's helpful for us. For instance, the context. So the context, whenever a span starts, it creates a span ID to identify the span. And if there is no trace already started coming through context propagation or within the service that is creating this span, a new trace ID is created. So we have the first span, or what we call root span, is the first one that will create the trace ID and the span ID. And whenever play song calls the buffer audio, now that we know about it, we pass the context to buffer audio. So we pass the trace ID and the span ID. And whenever buffer audio will start the span, it actually already knows that it's part of a trace, and it has another service or another part of the application calling the buffer audio. So what we have now is a correlation between them. So we have the same trace ID, a new span ID to identify the buffer audio, and the ID from the play song is set as parent ID. So now we have a relationship between play song and buffer audio. So that's how the tools can correlate and create a hierarchy of the connections between each span and have this view of the whole transaction. Cool. But it's great to have all this information and all this visualization. But let's imagine you're at home and you get paged and a specific user is having a problem. You have hundreds of thousands of users accessing your application at every minute. So how would spans help you? For that, we have attributes. So every span can have span attributes. And in here, I have an attribute called media song name, where I say, where I tell this span that the song name. So this play song is related to the Smells Like Teen Spirit. Now, answering the question, we can take advantage of the attributes and add more context to the span. For instance, the user ID that is playing this song, the user subscription type, for instance, here, premium. So whenever there is a issue with a specific user, we could simply use our tools to query for all the transactions containing that user ID or all transactions containing subscription type premium. So then it's easy to navigate all the data that you receive. And here I want to give the first tip of the talk, which is take advantage of the span attributes, but don't use that in a way that actually delays you and your team. So here is a case that a user shared with me. The person that was taking care of the instrumentation of the application added the whole JSON payload as an attribute. And not each map of the JSON into its own attribute, which actually would be a nice idea, but the whole JSON as plain text into the media.data, for instance, here. So this data is not queryable, this data is not helpful. It's actually just increasing the payload of your span and your trace in general, and not helping you in the end. So please don't do it. Cool. Now that we have cleared that path, let's quickly discuss about logs versus spans. And I want to highlight here and stress here that it's not about one versus the other, but actually when to use one and when to use the other. Logs are great for compliance and auditing. For instance, here, the user at Evader123 tried to access unreleased songs.pdf from Nirvana and got insufficient permissions. We can store this audit log in cheap storage for 5, 10, 20 years and just check if we need. But what I want to highlight and call out here is actually this type of log. I want to explain a bit, and then I would like to know how many of you have logs like that in the application. So whenever my function starts, my method starts, I have a log info, like a start log. My function does whatever it needs to do, and then right before ending the function, I have another log ending the transaction. How many of you have logs like that in the application? Okay. Well, for everyone that was brave enough to raise their hand, I'm sorry to tell you. Well, actually, I'm not sorry. I'm pleased to tell you this is not a log. This should be a span. Hi. And in Python, we could simply use the @tracer decorator here to whenever the getSongs is called, the span is started, and whenever the function returns, the span is ended. We get the duration of it. We can add attributes to this span later and take advantage of one single step. But how spans are actually created. So I don't know how many of you have seen Casper's talk on the first day. He talked a bit about instrumentation and the operator on OpenTelemetry. I'm taking a different approach here, and I'm going to show the 3 different ways of instrumenting, not using the operator. So the spans are created through instrumentation, and we had 3 different ways. One is the auto-instrumentation, where you have an agent, a file, or a script that you call, and within your application, like it starts together with your application and instruments your application for you. So here I have an example in Java, where in the first step, I download the agent. In the second step, I pass the Java agent parameter to my JVM, pointing to the agent that I just downloaded. And in the third step, I start my application. When I start my application, the agent starts together with my application and basically instruments my application for me, as the name says, automatically. And with that, I would get Tomcat data, Spring data, Hibernate data, and JDBC data. All of that without touching the code, without changing anything in my application. All of those libraries are detected and instrumented automatically for me. And talking about libraries, that's actually the second approach, which is via instrumentation libraries. The library creators or the community, they release packages that instrument a specific package for us. So the application owner, they just need to go and modify, of course, add the dependency, and then add an import, modify parts of the code, like really simple parts of the code, and that package would be instrumented, and it starts producing spans. I have an example here in Rust, where I'm using the ActixWeb framework, and for ActixWeb, there is an OpenTelemetry instrumentation ActixWeb. So I just added this crate to my cargo file, and now I just wrap my server using the request tracing, and whenever my handler songs is called, I get a span. In this case, I just have one span. The application is doing exactly the same as the Java application, but I just get one span because just the web server part is instrumented. Last but not least, we have the manual instrumentation. The manual instrumentation is the one that requires most effort from the developer and from the team that owns the application, but it's also the one that is more powerful and gives more control to you as application owner. Why? Because every time you want to create a span, you are the responsible for managing the context propagation, starting the span, giving it a name, adding the attributes, doing whatever you need to do, and then making sure the span is ended. So you basically own the data that you produce. And I have an example here. We already can see that it's way more verbose. So the first thing that I do there on the top is extracting the incoming context. So in distributed system, we never know if this is gonna be the root span or not. So we always need to kind of get the context, the incoming context. Then I start my span, giving it a name. I set a kind. I set a couple of attributes, hopefully following semantic conventions. And here it's nice to highlight that if I don't want any of those attributes, I simply remove the line. And then I do whatever I need to do and end my span. So again, we can see that it's way more verbose than the other approaches. And what we get a span, basically. Before we go deeper on the span itself, there is one thing that I want to call out here. Auto-instrumentation and instrumentation libraries, they are great, and if you don't have any visibility into your code, they will help you bootstrap instrumentation and getting observability ready. But don't let things come as they are. And why? Let me show you another example. Again, same application, but now using a framework called Express in JavaScript. And the Express instrumentation, the auto-instrumentation of Express, is known to be noisy. And we have here 15 spans, And out of those 15, 6 are actually from TCP and TLS connect and DNS lookup. Don't get me wrong, if you are the developer of TCP and TLS connect or DNS lookup, this information is great for you and will help your team check and improve this. But for us as application owners, maybe this span is not useful and it's just increasing the size of our spans, making our navigation harder. So check with your peers. If you don't think this is useful, just disable them. You, your team, and your bill will thank you later. Each language has its own way of disabling the instrumentation. Just check the OpenTelemetry docs and you'll find. So here I'm disabling the instrumentation net and instrumentation DNS. If for some reason you do not have access to the code, but the code is producing spans that you are not interested in, you can take advantage of the collector and put something in the way. And there is the OpenTelemetry collector. There is a processor called filter, and you can use the OpenTelemetry transforming language, OTTL, to filter out all the spans that have instrumentation scope, and then you pass the instrumentation name. So here, again, -net and -DNS. So what we get is now a way smaller trace, just containing the spans that we can act on, the spans that we have control. Be careful with this approach, though. Just for the sake of demoing, what I did, I created a rule to remove my request handler that is coming from the Express instrumentation. And we can see here that the Express handler is actually the parent of all those child spans. And when you remove the parent span, you kind of break the hierarchy of your trace. It's fine, you still get all the spans, but then you see that the navigation is kind of not ideal. And of course, in a bigger trace with not an example, that may be an issue for you while navigating. Cool. So now coming back to the spans itself, something that you didn't have visibility, now you can milk it. And one thing that I want to highlight is that Milk It is actually from another Nirvana album called In Utero, but never mind. Okay, so here I have a function again in Rust, and one thing that I want to highlight here is that we can take advantage of the auto-instrumentation or instrumentation libraries in the Rust case, and instead of managing creating the span, context propagation, ending the span, and all the verbosity that we saw, we can take advantage of the things that already exists and just enrich with our business data. So here I have an example where I just get the active span, and then I add song name, artist name, and user ID to that span. So then those attributes will be part of my span, and then I can query that without the need of actually creating and doing all the complex stuff that I shared before. Of course, you can create spans. So let's say that there is one part of your application that you don't have visibility. For instance, in the Rust example, we didn't have visibility into the database query. So I created a span here, the select songs DB songs span, added a couple of attributes that are important to me, did whatever the query does, and then ended my span. And now we have visibility into the database query. So I can see that from 7.34 seconds that the request took, 7.31 was actually getting the value from the database. But there is something you should stay away from. That is, it's very tempting once you start doing manual instrumentation to want to know how every single function, every single method, every single step of your application, you want to know how that's performing. So you do something that is a mistake that is called over-instrumenting. So then you kind of get things that are like microseconds or even nanoseconds that it's not actually giving you data, it's just polluting your trace, and you are basically recreating the Express instrumentation. So don't do that. Focus on the things that you can act on, and in here I just have the important part from my transaction, so I can keep track, alert on that, and then navigation is way easier. Another thing to stay away from that will drain you is not following semantic conventions. So let's say that you want to register the request method as an attribute. Would you use http.request_ method, http.request, or http method? 1? 2? Anyone? No? Okay. 3? Ah, cool. We have some people on 3. Well, sorry. And that was a tricky one. You shouldn't use any of those. There is the HTTP spans are actually stable on the semantic conventions of OpenTelemetry, and we should use http.request.method. So this is actually pretty easy to solve. So if you're using auto instrumentation or instrumentation library for a HTTP framework, OTel will already produce this for you. So we just stick to what OpenTelemetry is producing, and we are good. And if you need, of course, there will be cases where you need to instrument manually. Then if you need, you just go to the docs, check the stable semantic convention, and use it. But there is one important thing, that is not having company-wide conventions. For instance, when we have the environment name, should you call it production? Should you call it prod? Should you call it PRD? I don't know. That's not on me. This is on you and your team to sit together and decide. And whenever you decide, you should use the value that you agreed on. Otherwise, there are a couple of consequences, such as, let's say that you want to create a dashboard with red metrics, so request, errors, and duration, or latency. And that should be pretty easy, right, to all your production services. You just go and say, hey, I want to see these 3 metrics in all my services that have the tag production, or prod, or PRD. You see here, if I need to give the ORs, then I would have to build a query kind of grouping all of them together. But if we agree on one single value, then it's easy. Like for production, prod, and PRD, that's pretty easy. It's just 3 values. But imagine that you have multiple teams and your teams are adding their name into the attribute. So this will be a mess. So great. Either way, it's always a good idea to have an endless task of instrumenting, validate, prune and add, instrument, validate, prune and add. Your system evolves, your code gets refactored, OTel gets new features. So instrument, validate, prune and add, kind of forever. I don't know, put a task every quarter. So revisit your telemetry, not just your spans, your telemetry in general, to see what they are producing, what you can remove, what you can add, and how you can improve. And to help you with this endless task, there are 2 heart-shaped projects that I would like to share. One is pretty new. It's called Instrumentation Score, that it introduces a calculation formula to evaluate the telemetry that you are producing. It is a still new project, but with a great goal, so let's keep an eye on it, and hopefully eventually it will become part of the OpenTelemetry project itself. So let's see how that develops. And a second one that I want to spend more time is OpenTelemetry Weaver. Weaver can define, validate, and evolve your telemetry, kind of keeping the reliability of it. And with Weaver, we can generate docs for our own telemetry. So here you can see most of the attributes that I have are related to my songs application. So I have media song name, media song genre, media song year. I have also the user ID that is coming from the OpenTelemetry semantic conventions as well. So once you have this doc, you can share with your team, put in a repository or something, and then everyone can check the attributes that exist. Another thing that we can do with Weaver is creating code. So you define all your attributes used company-wide, and then generate the class. For instance, here in Java, you can create the Jinja modules and then just create that for you. And then here, kind of it creates with examples, documentation, or Java doc, and your team will simply use the constants that you define. And last but not least, you can use Weaver to kind of put in your pipeline, so it blocks developers from sending non-compliant telemetry or non-compliant attributes. So here, for instance, the user is sending media song, and Weaver is telling me that that was replaced by media song name. And the second one, the user is using media artist, and Weaver is telling, hey, this attribute doesn't exist in the registry. So either go check the attribute that exists, or use it, or request a ticket so we can include that to our attributes. Cool. So to end things up with no apologies, I want you to walk away with a couple of takeaways. First, use logs only where you have to. Spans will give you way more context and will help you troubleshoot better. 2, enrich existing spans. And if you don't have visibility into some part of your application, add spans where you need to. Hooking on that, do not over-instrument. So check if you're not getting too much into details into your instrumentation. And last, revisit, validate, and evolve your telemetry as you go. So for the ones that like to take picture, I have the 4 of them all together here. But I'm sharing these slides and also the repository with all the examples that I have that I used to build this slide on my personal blog, jcosta.dev. It's already there. And I have stickers from the character that I drew. So come grab some. Thank you.
Great Nirvana references and their use in your presentation flow, no question, but just something to agree on, at least from my side. I really enjoyed it. Let's come to questions now, really, but I will still leave that Nirvana reference thing. Span events versus logs, when to use what?
That's a great question. There is a blog post talking about difference between events and logs on the OpenTelemetry.io that Austin Parker, one of the members of the governance committee, released. I think it's from 2 months ago, so check that out. Honestly speaking, OTel at the moment is working on logs API, so that may be my answer may change, and even what he wrote on the blog post may change a bit. If you want something that is related to the span, I would say just use span events. The storage of that will be shorter. So usually it's like 2 weeks, depending on how you store your spans. If you need something that needs to be stored for longer in a S3 bucket or something, go for logs. Then logs would be the best.
Thank you. Is there a performance overhead?
There is always. So also, when you over-instrument your application, imagine that now your application is producing more data and is also exporting this data, sending to somewhere. So there is overhead. OpenTelemetry and most of the vendors that work with collecting telemetry from your application try to keep it minimal. But it's also tricky to say the overhead is X%, because it depends on your load, depends on your application, depends on your instrumentation. So the most classic answer on IT, it depends.
Thank you. OTel supports sending tracing over gRPC or HTTP. When should I use which?
Just use whatever it's best for you, and the one that you are more comfortable with. There is no performance difference, actually.
Thank you. When to use auto instrumentation and manual instrumentation?
So, if you are already mature on your observability journey, I would stay with manual instrumentation and do the things, keep the changes minimal to your code, and try to kind of just instrument the parts that you are more interested in, the bottlenecks of your application, and so on and so forth. If you don't have any visibility and you want to try it out and see what you would get, I would start with the auto instrumentation. The thing is that auto instrumentation is not available for all programming languages. Depending on the language that you are using, you may need to go to one or the other. For instance, Rust, there is no auto instrumentation. So either you use the instrumentation library, or for the frameworks that have an instrumentation library, or you do manual instrumentation. So that's it. But either way is always a great idea to validate what you are getting, because sometimes it's too much.
Thank you. How much data can you add as attributes to a span? What about cardinality?
So there is the number of attributes is limited. If I'm not mistaken, it's 128 attributes that you can add, attribute keys. I need to double check on that. Now I'm recorded, thank you. But there is a limit. On cardinality, this is on the values that you send on the span. So this is usually a problem when you are using metrics. For span is not much of an issue, if I'm not mistaken. But correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, do not worry about what you need to worry is about the attribute key. So if your attribute key is constant, then the values that you are sending, you're totally fine. If your attribute key changes, then you have a cardinality issue, so you should worry. And yeah, it's going to be a mess to actually use this value.
Thank you. Any insights on combining logs or spans from Cloudflare and GCP load balancer logs and my application when the different tools do not use the same key names and so on?
So it's not about the key here, it's about the context. So if your logs have the context, so trace ID and span ID, any or most of the observability tools can correlate the trace, the span, with the log. I would use Jaeger to show, but Jaeger doesn't support logs, just span events. But I don't know if I have here. Give me a second. Let me see. Well, anyway, I can show. Yeah, I don't have here. Sorry, I can show later if you are interested in a log with together with a span.
Thank you. Which GUI was those screenshots from?
The screenshots are from Datadog.
Awesome. What about a log message when starting a span? Should that be avoided then?
Yes. I would. For me, I would only use log for audit and compliance, but I'm the trace guy, so I love distributed tracing. I love OpenTelemetry. Even though OpenTelemetry supports logs, I would just always go for spans. But I know that span is more verbose, so it's if you start producing the same number of spans that you produce as logs, maybe your bill will explode. So check this out. And I'm not talking about any vendor here. I'm just saying that you will have more data being produced. So you need to pay for the transmission of this data and also the storage of this data. So if you produce more, you'll have to store more.
Thank you. last question, because we are also kind of not out of time, but it will match perfectly well. There are semantic conventions for attributes and metrics, but are there any for span naming?
For span naming, no, there are no conventions, but there are best practices. A friend of mine, Juraci, released 2 blog posts on the OpenTelemetry.io recently. I was working on the talk and he was posting best practices and I was like, oh, come on, I need to change all my span names now. So he shared some best practices on span naming creation and span attributes, span name and span attribute name. So check those 2 blog posts that kind of explain the logic between what OpenTelemetry suggests and how we use the naming on the OpenTelemetry instrumentations that we release, but also when you are creating your own spans, so you can follow the same rule.
Thank you. We could do a very quick yes or no answer, at least to the one coming up while you were answering. OTel traces are sometimes sampled, so some data might get lost. Is this done by the collector or only in some central place?
By the collector.
Perfect.
Well, you can sample on your application as well, depending on the sample, the sampling decision that you have. But there is head sampling, what you do in your application. There is tail sampling that you do on the collector. But yeah, this is a whole new talk. So I just need to.
So next year then.
Yeah.
Next year then. Awesome.
Cool.
Juliano, thank you so much. It was a great talk.
Thank you.
This is your round of applause. Come on.
Thanks, everyone.
Awesome.
From ContainerDays Hamburg, this video is proudly presented by DAX IT.